hey, why does it sometimes feel like we're waiting forever on a submission? And why does it always seem like that's a really bad sign when that happens? Well, I've been running the Pyarian with Dr. Keely Shell, and it's been going really well. And as editors, what we find is when we're sitting on a submission or we're sitting on a poem because we don't actually look at things on our end in terms of submissions because we're reading blind, poem by poem. But when we're looking at a poem for a long time, that tends to be that we're having a difficult time rejecting it. We're more likely to accept it at the end. So from my perspective as an editor, a normal, sane process would be holding on to a poem a longer period of time would be correlated with acceptance, not rejection. But anecdotally, on the other end, as a submitter, I've found a lot of times after I've been waiting, 6 months, I kind of assume that my submission's toast. And there's just no way. There have been situations where I've waited a long time and had an acceptance, but in general, I start to have a really bad feeling about things here, guys. So, but what about the data, right? What if there's a data-driven way to answer this question? And fortunately, kind of there is. There's Duotrope. Duotrope is a website that collects statistics about literary submissions and tracks them. People can use it to track their submissions. And if they do that and they report what they've been doing to Duotrope, you get all these interesting statistics about how long it takes for markets to respond. Now, of course, it's not a perfect system because the sample size is a little skewed and sometimes people misreport. And they're always keen to say that people tend to underreport rejection. But still, it's a useful data set, right? Well, I figure I'm a paying subscriber to Duotrope, and it's better to beg for forgiveness than to ask permission. So I kind of used a web driver to download a fair amount of data from them and run some regression and try to figure out what it is that's going on here. So let's find out. What I did is I took the 100 most challenging poetry markets and I got all the data associated with that. Okay. And what I found out was just over half, 55 of these, it's actually 98 that it listed, not 100, which is weird. Just over half, 55 of these magazines take longer to process most rejections than acceptances. That's kind of a head scratcher, right? Why are they taking a longer time to process most rejections than acceptances? We'll follow up on that. 19 of them took at least a month longer. So they took dramatically longer to reject than accept. One, Conduit, took a staggering extra 6 months on average to reject. Now that is just unbelievable. Okay. Now, you didn't see this data from me, but, yeah. Across all 98 of these literary mags, we have 103 days average to reject versus 91 days to accept. So the data strongly suggests that it's a very common practice to wait to reject. Now, my analysis here, it's going to be hard for me to generalize as to what's going on, right? We could have very charitable explanation, which is just like they might be collecting runners up and they're putting together an issue. And until they have confirmation from all their acceptances that those people are ready to go, they feel like, well, why bother rejecting people, right? It's also possible they just don't get around to it, that it's like the job no one wants to do to send out all the rejections and they make the intern do it. So, it's just something that gets delayed, right? And that there's no intentional malice or, there's nothing crooked going on here. There's a less charitable interpretation that something funny is going on. Now, I don't know that anything's funny is going on, but if it were, right, you could look at a magazine, at a title, which receives a huge number of submissions, and all of these top 98 most challenging journals receive a huge number of submissions. These journals naturally would prefer reading strong work. And perhaps they decide they're going to read the strong poets first. So what they do is they have an intern or a reader read over the cover letters, and for cover letters that look really strong of poets who are of great reputation, they advance them. And poets that aren't, they say, we'll deal with them later. So it's kind of like a tiered reading system here. It's kind of like a VIP list. Like you go to the club, you get all dressed up, you're excited to go out with your friends, and you get there, and there's a huge line. But there's some people who aren't waiting in line, right? So it's actually, if you think about it, it's kind of really super similar, because the VIP list has celebrities and stuff, or just, people in the know who are scene makers, and the club needs them in order to be hip and exciting. So same thing with these literary journals. It doesn't make it that appealing, though. It makes you feel kind of sad. But that doesn't make it unethical, right? So let's look at one magazine in particular, okay? That I think is doing, by all intents, but superficially at least, judging by the numbers, a great job. Rattle. Rattle takes several months longer to accept than reject. So they're completely the inverse of this paradigm. They're an outlier. So there's only a few other magazines I found in my database analysis that reject more slowly relative to their acceptances than Rattle. So Rattle has this really, really outlier thing going on where they take so much longer to accept than reject. So great for them. Now, if you look at Rattle, if you buy a copy of Rattle, you'll see that they have these theme issues, and the theme issues involve a lot of stuff that's solicited, but it's explicitly solicited. Then they have the part of the magazine that's open, which is the stuff that comes through general submissions, or the slush. Now, they don't say anywhere on the website that they have a blind process. They don't say that. But if you flip through there, you kind of are going to start to get the idea about it. Because a lot of the names aren't going to be recognizable, and a lot of them are just like totally out of the blue types of names, like not just poets you've never heard of, poets that nobody's ever heard of. And that's part of the allure of Rattle. That's part of what has made their reputation. So if everybody tried to do what Rattle did, there'd just be a lot of Rattle imitations, and it'd be lame and stupid. But you can see that's kind of, they're doing something very, very different than most literary magazines, and it's statistically reflected in it. If you send Rattle something, I'm not saying it's a good idea or a bad idea. You should read the magazine and decide whether you want to be printed in Rattle. They're very selective. But if you send them stuff, if you're waiting a very protracted period of time, that your work is probably being considered. Well, if you get it back very, very quickly, it was also considered. It just didn't interest them. So that probably is, in general, the type of journal I would like to engage in. Let's take a step back here, okay? So if you have Rattle on one side and you have a magazine, let's say Paris Review came up in the database, is really kind of tilted on the other end of it, where Paris Review really does seem very consistent. It does consistently reject poems significantly slower than it accepts them. And I have no idea, right, if this is what's happening, and if they have some type of thing where they look at cover letters and they decide if the poet is strong enough to appear in the Paris Review. But some type of process like that wouldn't really surprise me, because the Paris Review is just known as the place to read the strongest poets alive. Like that's kind of like what the Paris Review really is. It is a very, very exclusive journal, and part of that exclusivity isn't just about the quality of the poems themselves, but it's also about the type of people who are invited into this very, very rarefied terrain. And that doesn't make it bad or evil. And the fact of the matter is, other biases exist out there too. I mean, you could be dealing with editors who have all sorts of other prejudices. A prejudice to publish well-known or established poets isn't really a systemic bias per se. I find it to be not a process I would prefer to engage in. I would like my work to be treated as seriously as anybody else's. But it's not the same as a systemic bias where you have prejudices against people of color, or people of different genders, or gender identities, or sexuality, or a variety of other factors, religion, that would really be very disturbing and very troubling. And those aren't, this analysis of mine doesn't tell us anything about that. It just tells us, is your submission going to be on equal footing with stronger names? That's the inference here. The inference is, in a lot of cases, it's not going to be. Now, my recommendations here. Okay, I'm going to put this up over here so you guys can have a look while I run my mouth. These 10 journals don't charge fees. Okay, they don't charge fees, and all of these 10, all these dudes, they accept slower than they reject. And they all are on this list of most challenging markets, 100 most challenging markets on Duotrope. And I just rank them by basically popularity, how many people are submitting to them, assuming that they have this property where they reject quicker than they accept. So all of these, I believe, are free, free to submit to, are fee-free. Pretty sure that I double-checked all of them. But certainly I've submitted to many of these places, and will always submit to them. They oftentimes have pretty good response times as well. So, take some notes. These 10 certainly don't have this problem, and seem to be, they don't really care that much about who you are or, what your reputation is. They just want to read the best work. So the other advice I'd have for you is don't pay fees. There were some I took off this list here because they had fees associated with them, and I just decided why list those? Leave the fees to people who have more established reputations and have stronger names, because that's a lot of times it seems fairly correlated to me. Places charging fees are just not as interested. There are some exceptions, but in general, I would just say don't pay fees. You're probably paying for general entrance when there's a VIP list that they don't even pay to get into the club. Okay. And the last thing I would say is the Pierian with Dr. Keely Schell and myself. We read blind, and generally speaking, can't promise forever and ever and ever, but the trend has always been for us, we're going to accept slower than we reject. Food for thought. Thanks for joining me, and have a wonderful, wonderful poetry journey. If you like this type of content, please give it the thumbs up, give it the like, and give me a subscribe, as I will come up with more hot takes for you coming very soon.